The rain battered the streets of Seattle, a relentless drumbeat against the pavement, but Alexander barely noticed. His heart was a storm of its own, churning with the kind of pain that made breathing feel like a betrayal. 3 years ago, he'd stood in this same city, begging Caleb to see him, to love him, only to be met with cold indifference, a dismissal that shattered him into pieces he was still trying to reassemble. Now, at 25, Alexander stood taller, his dark hair slicked back from the rain, his green eyes sharp with a resolve forged from heartbreak. He adjusted the collar of his navy blazer, the fabric clinging to his lean frame, and stepped into the crowded rooftop bar. The city skyline sparkled through the downpour, a glittering contrast to the storm in his chest. He wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here to confront the past. The bar buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, a haven for Seattle's elite. Alexander scanned the room, his pulse quickening. He hadn't seen Caleb in 3 years, not since he'd vanished from Caleb's life, leaving behind a city that had once held his dreams. Back then, Caleb, with his golden hair and piercing blue eyes, had been everything. The charming law student who'd stolen Alexander's heart at a university mixer. They'd shared late-night coffee runs, whispered promises under starlit skies, and moments so tender Alexander thought they'd last forever. But Caleb's ambition had always been a shadow, growing darker as he climbed the social ladder, leaving Alexander behind like a forgotten footnote. "Alex," a voice called, slicing through the hum of the crowd. Alexander froze. That voice, deep, smooth, laced with a familiarity that made his skin prickle. He turned, and there he was, Caleb, standing by the bar, as devastatingly handsome as ever. His tailored suit hugged his broad shoulders, and his eyes locked onto Alexander's with a mix of shock and something else, regret, maybe? Alexander's stomach twisted. He hadn't expected Caleb to be here tonight, but fate had a cruel sense of humor. "You look different," Caleb said, stepping closer, his voice softer now, almost reverent. Alexander forced a smile, his heart pounding. Different? He'd rebuilt himself from the ground up, trading vulnerability for strength, heartbreak for purpose. He was no longer the naive boy who'd begged for Caleb's attention. He was a graphic designer now, thriving in New York, engaged to Ethan, a man who saw him, loved him, without hesitation. Yet here was Caleb, stirring up ghosts Alexander thought he'd buried. "I'm not here for you," Alexander said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside. "I'm in town for a client meeting." A lie, but Caleb didn't need to know that. He didn't deserve to know that Alexander's return was about closure, about proving to himself he'd moved on. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes searching Alexander's face. "Can we talk? Please." "I messed up, Alex. I know that now." The words hit like a punch, too late, too hollow. Alexander wanted to laugh, to scream, to walk away. But something in Caleb's expression, a crack in his polished facade, kept him rooted to the spot. They moved to a quieter corner, the rain streaking the windows beside them. Caleb leaned forward, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "I was an idiot," he said, his voice raw. "I took you for granted. I thought I could have it all, career, status, you. But when you left, it broke me. I've spent 3 years regretting it." Alexander's throat tightened. He remembered the nights he'd cried himself to sleep, the days he'd spent wondering what he'd done wrong. Caleb's words were everything he'd once wanted to hear, but now they felt like salt in an old wound. "You didn't even call," Alexander said, his voice low, sharp. "Not once. You let me disappear." Caleb winced, his hands reaching out, then stopping short. "I was scared. I thought you'd come back. I thought I don't know what I thought. But I'm here now, Alex. I want to fix this." Alexander's mind flashed to Ethan, his warm smile, his steady presence, the ring on Alexander's finger that symbolized a future Caleb could never offer. Ethan, who ran a nonprofit for queer youth, had been Alexander's anchor, his reason to believe in love again. And yet, Caleb's plea tugged at something deep, something Alexander thought he'd let go. "I'm engaged," Alexander said, the words a quiet thunderclap. Caleb's face fell, his eyes darkening with a mix of pain and disbelief. "To Ethan Carter," Alexander added, knowing the name would sting. Ethan, Caleb's old rival from law school, the man who'd always challenged Caleb's charm with his own quiet strength. Caleb leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he repeated, the word heavy with history. Of all people, the rain outside intensified, mirroring the storm brewing between them. Alexander's heart raced, torn between the past he'd fought to escape and the future he'd chosen. Caleb's return wasn't just a coincidence, it was a reckoning, and Alexander wasn't sure he was ready for it. The Seattle skyline blurred through the rain-streaked windows, a kaleidoscope of lights that felt like a mockery of Alexander's tangled emotions. He stood by the bar, Caleb's words still ringing in his ears. I want to fix this. Fix what? A love that had crumbled under Caleb's indifference, a trust that had shattered when Alexander needed it most? He took a sip of his whiskey, the burn grounding him. Caleb sat across from him, his perfect features softened by the dim light. But Alexander wasn't fooled. Caleb had always known how to wield his charm, how to make people want to forgive him. But Alexander wasn't that wide-eyed college kid anymore. He'd built a life in New York, a career, a love that didn't demand he beg for scraps of affection. Ethan's good for you, isn't he? Caleb asked, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. The question caught Alexander off guard. He'd expected Caleb to fight, to argue, not to surrender so easily. He is, Alexander said, his tone firm but not cruel. He's kind, driven, present. He doesn't make me feel like I'm chasing something I'll never catch. The words were a blade, and he saw them cut. Caleb's shoulders slumped, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. I deserve that, Caleb murmured. I was so caught up in my own world, law school, networking, building a name. I thought you'd always be there, waiting. I was wrong. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to hate Caleb, to let anger drown out the flicker of nostalgia that threatened to surface. But memories crept in unbidden. Caleb's laugh as they danced in their tiny dorm room, the way his hand had felt in Alexander's during late-night walks along the Puget Sound. Those moments had been real, hadn't they? Or had Alexander romanticized them to survive the pain? Why now? Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why come back after 3 years of silence? Caleb leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. Because I saw you on Instagram. A photo from some gala in New York. You were smiling, Alex, really smiling. And I realized what I'd lost. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I took a job here in Seattle to be closer to where we started. To find you. The confession hit like a wave, threatening to pull Alexander under. He thought of Ethan, waiting for him back in New York, planning their wedding with the same quiet joy he brought to everything. Ethan, who'd never made Alexander doubt his worth. But Caleb's words stirred something dangerous, a question Alexander had buried. What if? I'm not that person anymore, Alexander said, standing to leave. You don't get to waltz back into my life and expect me to unravel everything I've built. Caleb stood too, his hand brushing Alexander's arm, a touch that sent a jolt through him. I'm not asking you to unravel anything. Just give me a chance to show you I've changed. One coffee. That's all I'm asking. Alexander pulled away, his heart pounding. I need to go. He turned, the bar's noise swallowing him as he pushed through the crowd, the rain welcoming him back into its cold embrace. He needed air, space, clarity. But as he stepped onto the street, his phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Miss you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Guilt twisted in his gut. Ethan deserved better than a fiancé haunted by his past. The next morning, Alexander boarded a flight back to New York, the weight of Caleb's words lingering like a bruise. He tried to focus on Ethan, on their shared apartment in Brooklyn, on the life they were building. But Caleb's face kept creeping into his thoughts, a ghost he couldn't banish. When he landed, Ethan was waiting at JFK, his blonde hair catching the sunlight, his smile warm and unguarded. Alexander pulled him into a hug, hoping it would anchor him. How was Seattle? Ethan asked, his hazel eyes searching Alexander's face. Complicated, Alexander admitted, his voice tight. He wanted to tell Ethan everything. About Caleb, the bar, the plea for forgiveness, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he kissed Ethan, letting the familiar warmth of his lips chase away the chaos. For now, it was enough. But back in their apartment, as Ethan cooked dinner and hummed softly, Alexander's mind wandered. Caleb's Instagram message popped up on his phone. I meant what I said. I'm not giving up. Alexander deleted it, but the words burned into his memory. He glanced at Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing, and felt a pang of dread. Caleb wasn't just a memory anymore. He was a choice, a dangerous, tempting choice. New York's autumn leaves painted the streets in hues of amber and crimson, a stark contrast to the gray uncertainty clouding Alexander's mind. He sat in a cozy Brooklyn cafe, sketching designs for a client, but his pencil hovered over the page, his thoughts drifting to Caleb's plea. "I've changed. Could people really change that much? Or was Caleb just chasing the thrill of what he'd lost?" Ethan slid into the booth across from him, his nonprofit's logo emblazoned on his hoodie, his smile a quiet balm. "You've been quiet since Seattle," he said, his voice gentle but probing. "Everything okay?" Alexander's heart skipped. He'd always prided himself on being honest. But how could he explain the turmoil Caleb's return had unleashed? "Just work stress," he lied, hating the taste of the words. Ethan reached for his hand, his touch steady, and Alexander felt a wave of guilt. Ethan deserved the truth, but the truth felt like a betrayal. That evening, at a charity gala for Ethan's nonprofit, Alexander tried to lose himself in the crowd. The venue sparkled with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and ambition. Ethan was in his element, charming donors with his passion for queer youth advocacy. Alexander watched him, pride mingling with unease. Ethan was everything Caleb hadn't been: present, selfless, unwavering. So why was Alexander's heart still caught in a tug-of-war? His phone buzzed. Another message from Caleb: "I'm in New York. Can we meet?" Alexander's breath hitched. "Caleb here?" The audacity of it sparked anger, but also a dangerous curiosity. He deleted the message, but the temptation lingered. He excused himself from the gala, stepping onto a balcony overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The city glittered below, a reminder of the life he'd chosen. But Caleb's shadow loomed, threatening to unravel it all. The next day, against his better judgment, Alexander agreed to meet Caleb at a quiet park in Chelsea. Caleb stood by a fountain, his navy coat flapping in the autumn breeze, his face a mix of hope and nerves. "You came," he said, his voice soft. "I shouldn't have," Alexander replied, crossing his arms. "I'm happy, Caleb. I'm engaged. Why are you doing this?" Caleb stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Because I love you. I always have. I was too stupid to see it then, but I see it now. I'm not the same guy who hurt you." Alexander laughed, a bitter sound. "You think words fix 3 years of silence? You think you can just show up and erase the pain?" His voice cracked, betraying the emotion he'd tried to bury. Caleb's face softened. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I know you felt what we had. It was real, Alex, and I think a part of you still feels it." The words hit too close to home. Alexander turned away, his eyes stinging. He wanted to deny it, to say Caleb meant nothing, but the ache in his chest told a different story. He thought of Ethan, of the ring on his finger, of the future they'd planned. But Caleb's presence was a siren call, pulling him toward a past he'd never fully let go. "I need time," Alexander said finally, his voice barely audible. Caleb nodded, his expression a mix of hope and fear. As Alexander walked away, the park's leaves crunching under his feet, he felt the weight of a choice he wasn't ready to make. Ethan or Caleb, the future or the past, safety or risk. That night, Alexander lay awake beside Ethan, the steady rhythm of his breathing a contrast to Alexander's racing thoughts. He wanted to be the man Ethan deserved, but Caleb's return had cracked open a door Alexander thought he'd locked forever. The question wasn't just who he loved, it was who he could trust with his heart. The days blurred into a haze of indecision, each moment with Ethan tinged with guilt, each thought of Caleb laced with danger. Alexander threw himself into his work, designing logos for a startup, but his sketches felt lifeless, his creativity stifled by the storm in his heart. Ethan noticed, his hazel eyes searching Alexander's face with growing concern, but Alexander deflected, unable to face the truth. Caleb's messages kept coming, each one a quiet plea. "I'm staying at the Hudson Hotel. Room 512. Just talk to me." Alexander ignored them, but the temptation gnawed at him. He remembered Caleb's touch, the way his laughter had once lit up Alexander's world. But he also remembered the nights he'd spent alone, waiting for a call that never came. One evening, Ethan surprised Alexander with a rooftop dinner at their apartment building. The table was set with candles, the city skyline a breathtaking backdrop. Ethan, in a charcoal sweater that hugged his frame, looked at Alexander with a love so pure it hurt. I know something's been off, Ethan said, his voice steady. You don't have to tell me everything, but I need to know you're still with me. Alexander's throat closed. He wanted to confess, to lay bare the chaos Caleb had unleashed, but fear stopped him. What if Ethan walked away? What if the truth broke them? I'm here, Alexander said, squeezing Ethan's hand. I love you. The words were true, but they felt incomplete, shadowed by Caleb's ghost. The next day, Alexander found himself outside the Hudson Hotel, his heart pounding as he stared at the entrance. He hadn't planned to come, but his feet had carried him here, driven by a need for answers. He took the elevator to the 5th floor, his resolve wavering with each step. When Caleb opened the door, his face lit up, a mix of relief and hope. You came, Caleb said, stepping aside to let Alexander in. The room was sleek, modern, with a view of the Hudson River glinting in the afternoon light. Caleb looked different here, less polished, more vulnerable. I didn't think you would. I don't know why I'm here, Alexander admitted, his voice tight. I shouldn't be. I'm engaged, Caleb. I have a life. Caleb nodded, his eyes never leaving Alexander's. I know, and I hate that I'm doing this to you. But I can't let you go without fighting for you. Not again. They talked for hours, the conversation a dance of pain and nostalgia. Caleb spoke of his regrets, of the emptiness that had followed Alexander's departure. He'd left law behind, he said, trading it for a quieter life as a writer, trying to find meaning beyond ambition. Alexander listened, torn between skepticism and the pull of their shared history. When Caleb reached for his hand, Alexander didn't pull away. The touch was electric, familiar, dangerous. For a moment, he let himself imagine a world where Caleb had never let him go, where they'd built a life together. But then Ethan's face flashed in his mind, and he stood, breaking the contact. I can't do this, Alexander said, his voice breaking. I'm not the person you left behind, and you don't get to rewrite our story now. Caleb's eyes glistened, but he nodded. I'll respect whatever you choose, but I'll always love you, Alex. Alexander left, his heart a battlefield. He walked the streets of Manhattan, the city's pulse a mirror to his own. He loved Ethan, but Caleb's return had exposed a truth he couldn't ignore. A part of him still yearned for the closure he'd never gotten. The question was whether he could find it without losing everything. Winter crept into New York, dusting the city with snow and a quiet that felt both peaceful and oppressive. Alexander tried to focus on wedding plans, picking venues, tasting cakes, but Caleb's words haunted him, a melody he couldn't shake. Ethan sensed the distance growing between them, his patience fraying as Alexander's silences grew longer. One night, at a friend's holiday party, Ethan pulled Alexander aside, his face tight with worry. I can't keep pretending everything's fine, he said, his voice low but firm. You're here, but you're not. If it's about Seattle, about him, just tell me. Alexander's heart sank. He'd wanted to protect Ethan, to shield him from the chaos, but his silence was hurting them both. It's Caleb, he admitted, the words spilling out like a confession. He's back. He's in New York. He wants me. Ethan's face paled, but he didn't flinch. And what do you want? He asked, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. I want you, Alexander said, the truth raw and certain. But I need to figure out why he still matters. Why I can't let go. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I love you, Alex. But I won't compete with a ghost. Figure it out, but don't make me wait forever. The conversation left Alexander reeling. He loved Ethan, but Caleb's return had forced him to confront the wounds he'd never fully healed. He needed closure, not just for himself, but for the future he wanted with Ethan. So, he made a decision, one last meeting with Caleb, to end it once and for all. They met at a quiet diner in the West Village, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Caleb looked tired, his usual charm dimmed by the weight of their history. I'm leaving New York, he said, surprising Alexander. I came to fight for you, but I see it now, you're happy. And I won't be the one to ruin that. Alexander's chest ached. He'd expected a battle, not surrender. Why now, he asked. Why let go now? Caleb smiled, a sad, wistful thing. Because I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if it's not with me. I messed up, Alex. But you deserve better than my mistakes. The words were a release, a weight lifting from Alexander's shoulders. He saw Caleb clearly now, not as the man who'd broken him, but as someone who'd lost his way, just as Alexander had once lost his. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice soft, "for letting me go." They parted with a hug, a final goodbye that felt like closing a book. Alexander walked home through the snow, his heart lighter, his path clearer. He loved Ethan, not because he was the safe choice, but because he was the right one, the one who'd seen him, loved him, through every storm. Spring bloomed in New York, the city awakening with color and possibility. Alexander stood in a tailored suit, his heart full as he faced Ethan at the altar. The rooftop venue overlooked the Hudson, the same river that had witnessed his turmoil months ago. Now, it sparkled under the sun, a symbol of renewal. Ethan's smile was radiant, his hazel eyes bright with love. "I choose you," he said, his vows a promise that anchored Alexander's soul. "Through every doubt, every storm, I choose you." Alexander's voice trembled as he spoke his own vows, each word a testament to the journey they'd shared. "You saw me when I couldn't see myself," he said. "You gave me a home, a future. I choose you, Ethan, today and always." The crowd cheered as they kissed, the sound fading into the hum of the city. Alexander felt whole, the ghosts of his past finally at rest. Caleb's departure had been a gift, not of pain, but of clarity. He'd taught Alexander that love wasn't about chasing what was lost, but about building what could be. Later, at the reception, Alexander pulled Ethan onto the dance floor, their bodies swaying to a soft melody. "I'm sorry," Alexander whispered, his cheek against Ethan's, "for making you wait." Ethan's arms tightened around him. "You're here now? That's all that matters." As they danced, Alexander thought of the boy he'd been. Broken, searching, desperate for love. He'd vanished to find himself, and in doing so, he'd found Ethan. Caleb's return had been a test, not of love, but of trust. In himself, in Ethan, in the life they'd built. The stars above glittered, a mirror to the city below. Alexander closed his eyes, letting Ethan's warmth ground him. He'd chosen love, not out of fear or nostalgia, but out of truth. And in that truth, he'd found his forever. The future stretched before them, bright and uncharted. Alexander knew there would be challenges, doubts, storms. But with Ethan by his side, he was ready. For the first time, he wasn't running from the past or chasing a ghost. He was home,